Great. Welcome to What's the 411 Sports. I'm Glenn Gilliam. We're here at the 2014 U.S. Open Championships, and we've got the distinct pleasure of having the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer joining us today, Mr. D.A. Abrams. D.A., thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Definitely. I've got to ask you, this has been an absolutely amazing tournament. The weather's been great, but it's been also notable that your young stars are really showing themselves. They're coming through qualifying. They're getting into the tournament. It's been a little tough going after that, but how important is it to have those young stars of color represent, be successful, and it helps your cause?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, if you take note of the demographic change in the country, the fact of the matter, there are more people of color living here. So it just makes sense for us to have more people of color doing well in the sport of tennis. I mean, that's the way that we're going to attract more folks of color, in my judgment.
I got to ask, what is the Chief of Diversity and Inclusion's responsibilities, just kind of generally, and what other departments do you oversee on that?
All right, so the mission of the United States Tennis Association is to promote and develop the growth of tennis. So the way in which I like to describe what I do is that's making tennis look like America. And we have an all-hands-on-deck approach to how we intend to make that happen. We have strategic direction of 6 different pillars, which, again, I mean, we can get into later in the interview, but I mean, it really covers everything, not just young kids playing tennis. Everything from the volunteers to the staff to supplier diversity, you name it, we're trying to touch it all.
That's incredible. One of the things that we're excited about in doing this interview is to give you guys a little bit more exposure. I know you're mostly behind the scenes, but this is something that we think is really important. I know our viewers value it, so we appreciate it. I got to ask, with regards to your programs and talking about how you build that fan and volunteer base, is it something where your programs talk about the history of the game? Althea Gibson's birthday started this tournament, and there's obviously a lot of history there with Arthur Ashe, Dr. Robert Walter Johnson, who is his coach and Althea's coach. Are those things included in the program at all when you're trying to get folks excited about it?
So earlier I said we had an all-hands-on-deck approach to how we are going to increase diversity for the betterment of the game. And then I talked a little bit about our pillars. So let me go through those real quickly. So we have 6 pillars. The first one is human assets. So human assets is everything from volunteers to staff to providers to coaches to fans and ultimately to players, right? I mean, we believe that we need to diversify all of that in order to most effectively promote and develop the growth of tennis. The next one is image. So you asked a question earlier, regarding, I think, Arthur Ashe and Althea Gibson. I mean, we want to make sure that we're putting out very positive images, and we want to make sure that we're showing folks that, hey, you too can play this sport. So image both internally and externally is very, very important to us. And then supplier diversity is extremely important. Now, some folks may say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, when you think about it, the suppliers, if you will, diverse suppliers, they live in the community. If not living in the community, many times they serve the community. They have customers from the community. They represent the community. So if we're trying to grow tennis through the community, it just makes sense to be doing business in the community. And then the fourth one would be our sections and community engagement. So we have 17 sections across the country. So as opposed to us just going down to each section saying, listen, these are our 6 pillars and you have to do A, B, C, D, and E, that's not how we do it. We go in and we have conversations with them about what's important to them, and then we come up with D&I solutions to really speak to their needs. The fifth one would be strategic partnerships. Now, I'm not really a fisherman, well, certainly not a good fisherman, but if I was, I want to go with the fish are biting, right? So it just makes perfect sense to go to these organizations that are already servicing these audiences that we want to attract to tennis. And then the 6th one, to me, is really the one that if you have this one, the other 5 are going to be a piece of cake, and that's training and development. So if you know how to make this happen, not just us, but again, across the organization, then it's going to be a little more easier to make this happen, if you will.
I got to ask, to your tenure with the USTA, how did it start? How long have you been in this role? did you always have a love of tennis or sports in general? And what was your role prior to taking on this chief role?
Wow, so I've been with the USTA for a long time. I've been with the USTA since 1993, so that's 20 plus years. I've been in this role for a little over 2.5 years. But I have to tell you, I mean, I've started off as the national coordinator for a program called National Junior Tennis and Learning, which was founded by Arthur Ashe and a couple other fellows way back in the day, 1969 or so. And then, I did that for a while. I did minority participation. That's what we used to call it before it became diversity and inclusion. And then from there, I became the executive director of one of those 17 sections that we talked about. I moved there. I did that for close to 4 years. And then I came back to the national office to serve as the director of the NJTL. We had created its own department, which then grew into covering special populations, adaptive tennis, wheelchair tennis, awards. So it became much more than what it was when I first came on. And then from there, I left and went to another one of our sections and headed that one up as well. Did that for about 6 years and then came back to the USTA in this role. So again, it's been 20 plus years, but it seems like it's been, 20 months or so. It's been going by really, really quick.
Well, I mean, so did you always have a love of tennis?
I learned how to play tennis through the National Junior Tennis and Learning Program in Philadelphia. And just to go back to how I think images are very, very important, I was watching now, I tell this story, and I just want to make sure that I'm telling it correctly. I was introduced to tennis before I actually started to really play. My sister took me out to the courts. It wasn't a lot of fun because we were just hitting at the ball. We're both picking up balls, right? So it really wasn't until I'm at home watching PBS, because this was back in the day when tennis used to come on TV just about every weekend. And I see this African-American guy playing. That happened to be Arthur Ashe. Now, he made it look so easy that I thought, now if Arthur Ashe can do this, I can get out there and do this too. Well, that wasn't the case. But I did go out, and it got me playing, and it's kept me playing. And that is the reason why, quite frankly, I'm in this role today. My love of tennis and just being able to not just play tennis, but use tennis as a vehicle to better myself. And it's not just me. It's so many youngsters that were brought up in this local program in Philadelphia, which is a national program. There are over 600 such programs throughout the country, touching about 300,000 kids or so every year. So it's a very powerful program.
That's a great story. Appreciate it. And just to get a little more personal, what's your hometown? Where you're from? Where'd you go to school?
I'm from Philadelphia. I grew up in North Philadelphia. I went to high school at a place called Strawberry Mansion, pretty tough neighborhood. Was fortunate enough to get a tennis scholarship to a small Division II college, state college by the name of Millersville, which is in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So that worked out quite well for me, but I think it even worked out better for my parents because they didn't have to pay anything.
Well, just curious, in terms of the transition to the USTA, was that something where after you found your love of tennis, you were playing it? How did you find your way to the organization?
So that's a really good question. I grew up playing tennis. When I graduated from college, I went to work as an accountant for a company called Control Data Corporation out in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, St. Paul, Minneapolis. I did that for about 4 years. And I'm not a millennial, but I probably have traits of millennials because I just wasn't patient enough, quite frankly. I wanted to get back to tennis. Now, had I stayed there, I probably wouldn't be here today, but it was a blessing that I wasn't patient enough, wanted to get back into tennis, went back to Philly, worked for an organization called the Arthur Ashe Youth Tennis Center, which was deed restricted for kids, and did that for a little bit, about 4 years or so, and then got the opportunity to come work at the United States Tennis Association.
Fantastic. In terms of those human assets, I got to just ask, I know it's got to be important, a couple of your colleagues, of people that work with you, have been very instrumental in setting this up, and we're so excited about that. How important is it to broaden that diversity pool at the USTA and see those people get elevated, they get promoted and move on?
Well, it's very, very important. In fact, it's so important. We have what we like to call a D&I, a diversity and inclusion scorecard. And tennis participation is one of the markers and one of the measures. I mean, that's very important. Our mission is to promote and develop the growth of tennis. Talked earlier about how supplier diversity is very important, so that's one of the markers. But the other two markers are, in my view, extremely important. And they both have to do with human assets. The first one is our volunteers, both on the section level, we have 17 sections, and then on the national level, 3 offices at the national level. But then at the same time, we want to look at our staffing. So we're looking at the same thing at our section level as well as at the national level. So, what does that all mean in terms of moving up to leadership positions? We're looking at everything, but at the same time, we're measuring, who's leading these organizations, who's in management, who are members of the C-suite. So we count that because we think it's important to have some benchmarks and to set some goals against those benchmarks. And I will tell you that now today, if you look at where we are today as opposed to where we were when I started, is night and day. It's night and day. In fact, when I started on the board of directors, our volunteer board, there was one gentleman of color by the name of Gary Lee, Asian American male from Northern California. And then he was on for a little bit, and then he dropped off. And then there was an African American male that came on the board by the name of Dwight Mosley, first African American to make the board. He was on for a little bit. Unfortunately, he passed away, and then Mayor Dinkins came on to the board, and he served for a while. But it was really while Mayor Dinkins was serving that other folks of color started to serve as well. So it was no longer just one at a time. So fast forward to where we are today. Our first vice president is a woman by the name of Katrina Adams. She is the first African American person to serve in that role. So, we're hoping one day that she will rise to the level of president. And if that happens, she will be the first African American president of the United States Tennis Association. So again, not a lot was happening in 1993. We were trying, we were starting it, but now you fast forward to the day, and it's looking pretty good there.
That's extremely exciting. We love Katrina Adams. We know she's an on-air personality. But we're going to be right back with a little bit more, and we're going to wrap up our interview with Mr. D.A. Abrams. You stay tuned. We'll be right back with What's the 411 Sports. We're back with What's the 411 Sports. I'm Glenn Gilliam, and we're here once again at the 2014 U.S. Open Championships, and we have the distinct honor of having Mr. Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, D.A. Abrams, with us. D.A., thanks for staying with us. I know your mission is to reflect America ultimately with regards to your programming, soliciting volunteers. I know that's a mainstay, yes. Including fans, getting more players involved. For the African American community, we know the barrier is always economic. Access to courts, training, instruction, equipment. What do you guys do specifically to try to address those things?
Well, we do a number of things. Well, let's first start with that NJTL program. What I failed to say earlier is that NJTL program is an outreach program. It's really designed to attract youngsters that would not ordinarily play the sport. So that's number one. And we're in 600 markets across the country, right? Number two is we have a schools program where we actually take tennis to where the kids are during the day. And we partner with other organizations to provide after-school programming. So we are ensuring that we're going to reach African Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, members of the LGBT community, and others. We're taking the sport to them. Now, in terms of the equipment, what we've done a couple years ago is we basically youth-sized the equipment. So think about that. When I started to play, I was trying to play with the same racket as Arthur Ashe. The racket looked nice, but I wasn't hitting the ball. And the balls were nice and all that, but I never hit the balls. Today, the balls are softer, they bounce higher, the equipment's a lot smaller, the nets are shorter. So when you go out, you're pretty much going to have instant success. You may not be able to hit the ball like Serena Williams or Venus Williams, but you will have instant success. And it makes the game a lot of fun, which will keep you coming back.
Are there organizational goals, milestones that you're trying to achieve with your team or the organization in terms of participation levels or communities that you're trying to bring the programs to?
So again, one of our markers is to ensure that we increase participation among diverse audiences. Again, to promote and develop the growth of tennis, that's the USTA's mission. Our aim is really to make tennis look like America, so we're doing a number of things to make that happen. Now, I'll just go through a couple. Now, I talked about the outreach stuff. So now I want to talk about, earlier you talked about some of the kids of color that were doing quite well in the beginning of the tournament. Well, years ago we didn't quite have that. But what we do now is we offer funding to assist those youngsters. We try to bridge the gap with the funding. So what the funding does, it helps them with their tournament expenses, it helps them with their equipment expenses, helps them with their travel expenses and their coaching expenses. And that is working quite well.
I gotta say congratulations on the 2014 nomination for the Dandy Award. That's the Diversity and Inclusion Award. You guys were up against golf and swimming. We know NASCAR won last year. You guys were awaiting, I guess, that final say-so. What are you guys doing with your initiatives to distinguish yourself against your competitors?
Again, we have a D&I, all hands on deck, strategic plan and approach to really ensuring that diversity and inclusion is utilized as a strategy to grow tennis. We went through the 6 pillars earlier. What we didn't talk about is how we have those 6 pillars supported by recommended goals for each one of the pillars, number of goals, in addition to that, suggested tactics. Not just at the national level, but at the section level, not just with our board and our volunteer committees, but with our national staff as well as our section staff and volunteer committees.
Well, last year you created a cultural dexterity program, and permit me to rename that cross-cultural dexterity program. Give me a little bit more information about that and your trainer to train the trainer program, and give us some idea of what's included with that.
So for the most part, what we want to ensure is that folks understand themselves, right? So it's easy to tell other people what they need to be working on, but in order to do that, you really need to understand what you need to be working on. So this is a great program, whereas we sort of customize it for each audience. So when we go to the different sections, as opposed to taking the training that may occur at the national level, we'll take it and customize it to each of the 17 different sections. And we even do the same thing when we're working with different departments within the organization. The ultimate goal is really to match the needs of our customers with D&I related solutions. So we'll go through all of the preamble stuff, but a large part of the training is, okay, so now you've heard all of this, we've gone through some of these exercises, how are we now going to apply what we learn to what you do every day? And that is working quite well for us.
We're going to wrap this up, but I want to ask you about those JTLs, the Junior Tennis Leagues. I know you've mentioned there's 600 across the country. How influential is it that you have with those JTLs in terms of delivering your programs, and how do you guys interact with them to reach your goals?
Well, I mean, this is not hip-hop, but in hip-hop you would say street cred, right? I think that's what the young people say. So I grew up playing in JTL. I am an NJTL graduate. So I can go in and talk to folks, not just the administrators, but I can identify, if I can identify with the young folks, I can at least pull that card. So, I mean, I think it helps. We work very closely with that department. In fact, we have a number of cross-functional teams where we're working very, very closely with that department to ensure that we're supplying them with what they need, and they're helping us achieve our goals as well.
I just got to ask, with regards to what's going on in the country today, obviously with Ferguson here in New York City, it's got to be even more important, the work that you guys are doing. Do you try to relate any of that current events, that real-time stuff, to your trainers or your volunteers when you're implementing your programs?
For the most part, we do and we don't. I mean, if it comes up in a discussion, and current events, they do come up in discussions, we're prepared to work with that and to answer that, and to answer those questions, and to incorporate the learnings within the training. The big thing for us is really to get across the idea that D&I is a strategy. It's a legitimate and very powerful strategy to help you achieve your already existing goals, whether they be USTA, whether they be tennis related, whether they be life skills, life goals. You need this in order to really do extremely well, not just well, but extremely well.
Lastly, I want to touch on the supplier diversity. You talked about it a little bit earlier. How important is it to increase those ranks, to bring other suppliers into it? And what is the USTA looking for? What companies, what kinds of companies are you guys interested in bringing into the USTA?
Anyone that can provide a value add to us, we're very interested in learning more about it. We're very, very serious about supplier diversity. In fact, last year, well, let's start with 2 years ago, we had 15% diverse spend across the enterprise, which is very, very powerful. A lot of companies on average, maybe about 6 or 7%. Last year we went down slightly, but it was still at 13.5%. We have an individual on our team that's all they do. That's all they do. In fact, the USTA is so serious about really utilizing diversity and inclusion to help us grow the sport that we have a department of 6. And that's pretty big for D&I. I mean, there's some major Fortune 500 companies that don't have departments as large as we do. And the other thing is, there's some major corporations and organizations that don't necessarily have that all hands on deck approach to growing their business, such as we do. So we're really walking the talk, if you will, and I'm very proud of what our leadership is doing, both our president as well and the board, as well as my boss. I'm a direct report to Gordon Smith. Is just couldn't be more supportive. So it's a great place to be right now.
No doubt. I just got to ask quickly, are you familiar with the Major League Baseball Diversity Summit? And do you guys take a little best practices from that?
Well, yeah, we steal a lot of those best practices. We're very familiar with that. We've been to all 3. The last one was in New York. In fact, the consultants that they've used to help with build their supplier diversity program, we've borrowed them as well. We had Ralph Moore and Associates come in and assess our situation last year and took many of his recommendations, which included really engaging another diverse firm, which is a leader in the field, to help us build out our portal. And you know, we're on track to having that up and running by the end of the year. So we're very familiar with what they do. In fact, we steal a lot of what they do.
Mr. Abrams, you've been so gracious with your time. Lastly, I got to ask, what's your most rewarding moment as you're in your present position for yourself individually and with your team?
Well, okay, for me, again, I got to go back. I started a long, long time ago. And to know that we have an African-American serving as the first vice president of the USTA is extremely rewarding to me. I mean, it's not that I did that, but the fact that I work for an organization that has elevated someone of that stature to that position means a great deal to me, and I think it means a great deal to the organization and certainly to tennis.
Can you give their name?
I can. It's Katrina Adams.
Okay. As we spoke about earlier, very good. And in terms of your team, or just is there another goal that might have been something very rewarding, or that you'd like to expound on?
Well, I mean, I can just say that the USTA has been extremely supportive. I got to go back to when I started. It hasn't always been the way that it is now. So, you know, I can go into my boss and I can make a request as long as it makes sense and it makes sense to the bottom line and it is connected to what matters to the USTA. My chances are very good that he's always going to listen, but my chances are very good that he's not only going to listen, but that he's going to go ahead and implement that. I think I said earlier that at the United States Tennis Association, all directors and above must have a D&I related goal. It's not an option. They must have it. Now, that's new in 2014, and trust me, that's very big.
That's huge, and I would be remiss as a media company if I didn't ask, is there any opportunity to include more media partners of color to get your message out, to be a little bit more of a voice in those communities you're trying to target?
No, we would love that. I was a panelist along with Wendy Lewis from Major League Baseball, a fellow from NASCAR at the National Association of Black Journalists in early August, and I asked them. I told them, you know, you got to ask for what you want, right? So what you're asking me, the answer is yes. We would love for you and other companies such as yours to be very supportive in getting the message out. I mean, we have a lot of good stories to tell. I mean, we really do. From the grassroots to what we're doing in youth tennis, to what we're doing with adult tennis, to what we're doing to get these youngsters that are on the cusp of being maybe great players. They're definitely, obviously, they're already playing in the Open, right? But they may be great players. We have a lot of stories to tell.
We can't be more thankful for the story you've told today. D.A. Abrams, Chief of Diversity and Inclusion Officer with the USTA. Thank you so much for your time. You've been very gracious. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
That's What's the 411 Sports. Thanks for watching.